So, Todd, I think what we want to talk about today is just riffing on a question that we'll never answer in the amount of time that we have. It's a broad question, and I think it's something that people don't think about anymore because they think they know the answer, and I think most of the time they're wrong, even if their answers are opposites. But the question is, what is patriotism? Like, what does it mean to be a patriot? Not a fan of the New England football team, but like an actual American patriot. What did it mean 250 years ago? What does it mean today? And what does it mean really in political and ideological context? So we're both veterans, right? We served in the military. So maybe people think, oh, that's what makes you a patriot. You did something for your country that was selfless and involved sacrifice. But like there's many, many other definitions. So like you tell me, what's a patriot?
What's patriotism?
Or what is patriotism? Yeah, either way.
I tell you what I don't think it is, and why I get nervous about patriotism because I view it as historically it can be a Trojan horse for authoritarianism. Like I'm skeptical of like masses of people pledging loyalty to a nation. I can both see that as like a very beautiful and unifying act, and I can also see it as sort of like a dangerous act when not rendered appropriately. So to me, like part of patriotism is embedded with a sort of like innate skepticism and grounded reality. Like the founding fathers, the framers, if you will, were deeply skeptical. Like this is the genius of the Constitution, is that they were deeply skeptical of depraved human behavior, which is that powerful men will grab power for themselves and they will attempt to use sort of the instruments of the state to do so. And so the remediation of that is like branches of government, co-equal, balance of power. Like we call them the framers because they were literally framing a tension that they wanted to live within the system. And so to me, patriotism is like in this like deep like embrace of like a skepticism of like human behavior. Actually, it's not just like blind loyalty. It is not that. It is not just standing and applauding. It is not just red, white, and blue. It is not. It is like, I think, an intellectual honesty for me of like the tension that exists in the pluralistic society that people are going to sort of try and do what's good for them. And the genius of America is like that there is a tension and a balance within that like honors minority opinion, honors minority representation, honors diversity of thought, diversity of religion. And so to me, it's like, patriotism is like loyalty to the Constitution, which is a document that articulates how we're going to operate in that tension. It's not just America versus the world, And I don't know. It'd be interesting to get like a World War II veteran on, because like anytime I listen to like older veterans, it's not just out of like, I think to the extent that when they get to like a kinetic battlefield experience, it's like at the end of the day, what are they fighting for? They're fighting for like the person on the left and the person on the right. And in the case of World War II, like we were fighting a known tyrant, but the people that were fighting in support of Germany, I think were absolutely patriotic. Like, I think they thought that they were like sort of serving nationalistic. They were. I mean, they were serving nationalistic aims as well. And so I think that's where you have to like deconstruct a little bit and be like, well, it's not just about loyalty. It's not just like I stand for the flag. It's like, yeah, but what are we talking about here? And how does that not become a permission structure for tyrannical behavior or loyalty without question? So I am patriotic, but to me, like patriotism is really rooted in not the symbolism as much as it is like loyalty to the Constitution and adherence to the Constitution, which also means like you're not always going to win. Part of being a good American is like you don't always win.
I think your point about World War II is well taken. I think better illustrated to the Japanese kamikaze pilots, right? Who were like giving everything for their cause, something they believed in, their admiration for and dedication to their emperor and the empire. I think I also, you blew my mind a little bit. You have those moments where you're like, you realize that something you've thought since a child is actually false, because I grew up with a framed copy of the preamble of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in my stairway at home.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I never asked my parents why they had that, but it was like, as you went up the stairs, you could just see John Hancock's signature and stuff. And so I always thought they were the framers because you put those documents inside frames, and they were there with the hammer and nails
Those
framing
documents
the
are framed.
Constitution. Not metaphor. I mean, I literally were framing it, and then someone has literally framed it. It just might not have been James Madison. And so, but it gets to that document, right? And it is a piece of paper, but it's obviously a set of ideas and ideals, and it's based on a lot of different philosophical leanings of the time and the experience that those people had. And I think that yes, an adherence to and reverence for the Constitution is really, really important when we talk about patriots. I also think that there's something has happened to the nomenclature, the semantics since World War II, right? And it has a lot to do with the military. It has a lot to do with believing in the superiority of the United States. You've got this pride And then that pride adhered itself to an individual's or a group of people's sort of tribal beliefs in a way of government, politics, or ideology. And basically, the long story short is the political right took over the concept of patriotism, for better or for worse, no matter which side you're on. Like, I think it's pretty well established that like those are the folks who are calling themselves patriots. And I'll tell a quick story about tabling somewhere where I was giving away American flag pins, and the majority of the people who were coming up to the tables were, just by nature of the conference I was at, were left-leaning, Democrat, liberal, whatever. And I was really surprised that people weren't taking American flag pins. And then one woman said to me, no, I don't want one of those. I don't want people to think I'm MAGA.
Yeah.
And it's great. If she doesn't want people to think she's MAGA, fine, don't wear a red hat. But that's the only flag we have. And no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, you should have some reverence towards that flag. And I realized that it wasn't, I realized at that moment, it wasn't as much of the political right co-opting the concept of patriotism, or at least the semantic use of the term patriotism, as much as it was the political left giving it up and giving it away.
Yeah.
And then here we are as veterans who are like, I lean left politically, but like, I'm not giving up patriotism. I'm not giving up the flag. I'm not giving up those things. I come from a long line of people who have fought for it. And I think there's something in that. There's something both in why are people willing to let go of that, of a love of country, because they're concerned that it will seem nationalist.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's kind of like patriotism in the middle. On one side, there's nationalism, which is not great, especially if it's race-based nationalism. And on the other side, there's like civic pride, right? Which we're all still kind of okay with. And so like, where is it that overlap of like, this strong fist-pumping nationalism and this, sort of like genteel neighbor-based civic pride, and somewhere in the middle is patriotism.
Yeah.
But it's a love of country for sure, but it's also a love of the things that the country stands for. So whether it be the Constitution, the ideals of the founding fathers, the wars that we're fighting in now, and the military that's serving, or national parks, right? It was another great, exposition of our civic pride, patriotism, and love of country. Well, there's just the New England Patriots when it comes to sports. I don't know. Okay, how about this? It's a World Cup year, so the U.S. men's national team or the U.S. women's national soccer team, right? Mm-hmm. So like, I think in this World Cup year, I've had people say like, oh, no, I don't really care about soccer. I go, hey man, that's the one real national team that competes on an international stage. And so like, true patriots are into soccer. Let's just be really, really honest about that. I feel decently strong about that, because the World Baseball Classic isn't doing what they thought it would do. But the World Cup does. There's something there.
There's something there with the World Cup. I mean, and the other thing about patriotism, you look at, when have we been patriotic as a country, and like, post 9/11, right? And President Bush sort of playing unifier in chief and helping rally the country, and of course World War II, right? We have these moments of real clarity, and I think we've assumed, there's a couple of assumptions that sort of we live with. One is like American hegemony, that like America is the strongest and the best, and the most good. And I think we can argue about whether that's still the case. And I think that's being fractured.
And it's relative. It's always going to be relative.
And it's relative, right?
Judging.
It's relative. And so I think in some ways we've conflated, and then like everything gets put in the polarization machine. So now like everything, right? Like where you stand on any range of consumer issues, like patriotism now becomes the same thing, where it's like to be patriotic is to sort of like imply that you're far right, or or to be...
You have to hate the death tax to be a patriot, right? That's somehow that your policy on your tax policy and has anything to do with your patriotism is kind of ridiculous, because it should not be connected to your political views.
Right. And parties will kind of hijack that for their own purposes. We saw both parties trying to run a bunch of like retired generals to kind of claim like the military is the last frontier, to like define real patriotism is about like how much you support the military. And I'm like, I have to remind people, I'm like, John McCain, what made him so extraordinary as a patriot was like how critical he was of the United States military and of foreign intervention. Like he was the toughest critic because he came from that context, which is also, I think, why it's important to have veterans in Congress, not because they are supportive of the military, but because they're critical of the military, like because they actually understand the right questions to ask, as opposed to this like, don't question the budget size and the purpose and the stature of the United States military. Like to question it is to sort of like imply lack of patriotism, which of course is furthest from the truth. So, I mean, patriotism
failing your obligation in a democracy, right? As a citizen, right?
Yeah,
Like the full point of the democracy is that like we're going to question what our leaders are doing, and we tend to question more what they're doing. We question their extracurricular activities the more than we question their actual sort of legislative activities sometimes.
Right, and I think there's some part of this. Maybe this is what's clarifying for me is like patriotism is both participating in and criticizing productively, the country that we serve. Like, I think being on the sidelines and only throwing shots is like not helpful, right? But it's like I think you and I sort of come from this cloth of like having worn the uniform, having served, and being super critical and super supportive. Like I think there's a blend in that, but it's like I think your critique needs to be equal to your contribution in some ways, and maybe that's I don't know, maybe that's a working definition of patriotism. But to me, it is a lot more than whether you stand, where you salute, what you do on the 4th of July. Those things they're symbols of this, but there is something more foundational, which is like a loyalty to the Constitution. Maybe it was like, your parents were the original patriots because it hung on the wall. There was an understanding like these words matter. They were radical. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what we got to get back to.
I will start to wrap us up by saying that I did approach a man at a public venue this weekend who was wearing a T-shirt that had an American flag with, in the middle of it, a black outline of an AR-15. He was obviously a strong supporter of the Second Amendment and probably a chest-beating patriot. But I reminded him that his shirt was a violation of U.S. flag code. Nothing about the guns, just a violation of U.S. flag code. And it is. No penalties for violating U.S. flag code, but it is. And I'm a patriot, so I know that. A little bit cynically. But I think we take it back to World War II. I think we can start to, and we'll keep working on this, but I think we can start to get the inklings of a definition, because you mentioned that it's about people who serve, and you and I served in the military in uniform. And it feels like today, if you say, hey, somebody serves, that's what you immediately think of as they were in the military. But in 1943, if you were serving, if you were a able-bodied male, you're probably serving in uniform, either at home in Europe or in the Pacific. If you were anybody else of working age, you were maybe in a factory, or you were selling war bonds, or you were doing something on the home front that was just as much of the part of the effort and just as much of part of serving. And to be honest, like in the Iraq and Afghanistan era, we didn't have that, right? And we have created this, often say a warrior class, but a service class of folks who like, oh, you've served and I haven't, and so you can be a patriot and I can't, or I can and you do. And when I thank you for your service, that makes me a patriot because I love you and I love that flag and that anthem. But here's a pat on the back, see you later. End of the day, what we really need is just more opportunities for people to be serving. And hopefully it doesn't take a Pearl Harbor to make that happen, or a 9/11 to make that happen. It didn't for 9/11 necessarily, but moreover, like, how do we create opportunities for people to feel like they're engaged in patriotic acts, in serving the nation and the country, sort of like our grandparents did? And I think we'd get closer to understanding what patriotism is and what it means to be a patriot.
Yeah, I love that. It's like in the absence of a national project, definitions of patriotism sort of devolved to like polarized, kind of signaling. And patriotism at its best is sort of like a unifying national project. And then the question for us becomes, can we have that absent global conflict? Like, can it be like, a New Deal to like rally America in response to AI proliferation and have a new American vision that, prepares America for what's coming? Like, that would be a great rally cry. Can we get there absent a crisis? I don't know, but that's kind of my hope that we can. I think we can. I mean, what I believe fundamentally is American people are good, but I think that they get sort of hijacked for political purposes and other purposes, and so they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And it is a tragedy to me that young people like sort of have this innate skepticism. Those that identify as progressive of being patriotic, that is like a label that has become sort of taboo. That's got to be remedied, but it's got to get more foundational. It's got to move beyond symbolism towards like original definitions of what is patriotism, loyalty to the Constitution. What does the Constitution say? Why is that radical? Why is loyalty to that important? Look at us, just like some old guys talking,
Two old white guys telling you how to think about patriotism.
With a lot to say about patriotism.
Hey, you know what?
You're a patriot.
We've lived it. You're a patriot, Todd, and I thank you for showing patriot. And this recording, this conversation, in no way, shape, or form endorses fandom of the New England Patriots. I want that to be very, very clear. Nor
this has
the Patriot League,
New England Patriots,
and collegiate members of the Patriot League. This is a different type of patriot. But with that, we can sign off, and we'll keep talking about it. We'll figure it out someday what patriotism is. But
more soon,
we're getting closer.
More soon.
Okay. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks.